Hey guys, I'm Mr. Giant, and today I'm starting the series on Caribbean islands. And of course, I'm gonna start with Grenada because that's where we're from. And this one is called A Brief Political History of Grenada. Yeah. I'm going to be interested to see somebody else's perspective of the history of Grenada and thing. I hope you guys enjoy this with me. Let's YouTube and simmer and see what Grenada's political history is all about.
It might not seem like it walking around St. George's picturesque streets or tanning in any of the beautiful beaches in the country, but Grenada has had a tumultuous past full of violence. It also remains the only English-speaking island in the Caribbean to have been invaded by the United States. To see why, join me for this brief look at the history and politics of Grenada. Prior to the arrival of the Europeans, the island was inhabited mainly by the Caribs. They were migrants from the South American mainland who first established communities in Grenada around 1100. Expert navigators who raided their neighbors in large dugout canoes, they had previously driven out the more peaceful Arawaks from the island. Their society lacked any important...
A little tidbit we were told in history, I don't know how true that is or if it's just myth, but it said that the Caribs were chasing the Arawaks down through the islands and they would commit cannibalism on them. So, they would hop from island to island, and it was a belief, so it was said that if they eat the dead of their enemies or the people that they fight against, that would make them stronger. That's a story or a myth that I heard, and I don't know if I heard it in history class or where, but I heard that story.
Chiefs, military organization, or hierarchical structure, and thus internal conflicts were common. Rather, they were ferocious and individualistic, traits that would shape their interactions with the Europeans. In 1498, Christopher Columbus became the first European to sight the island of Grenada during his third voyage to the New World. He did not land, however, and merely named it Concepcion, a moniker that was never used. Instead, Spanish sailors called the island Grenada, presumably after the city in Andalusia that the Spanish had just reconquered from the Moors. Eventually, it took on the French version of the name, in large part because although the Spanish claimed it, they never tried to colonize it. Indeed, it was not until 1609 that English tobacco planters attempted to settle, but within a year, most would be killed by Caribs. It would take another 40 years for a permanent settlement to be established. This was under the leadership of Jacques du Parquet, the governor of the nearby French colony of Martinique, who brought a contingent of 203 men and made a peace deal with the chief Kairouane when they quote-unquote purchased the island from the Caribs for a few hatchets, some glass beads, and 2 bottles of brandy. Not all Caribs were pleased with the land deal, however, and skirmishes continued until the French troops chased the last of them to Satur Bay at the northern end of the island. Rather than submitting to the colonists, the remaining Carib men, women, and children jumped to their deaths from the cliffs.
Yeah, today they call that place Leapers Hill, and I've been there, you know what I mean? And to avoid being captured and enslaved, a whole community jumped over that cliff. That's crazy, isn't it? Wow, you know what I mean? And I learned about it in history class and stuff, and we had a field trip to there and all of that as they explained the whole history of it to us. But every time I think about it, it's just the enormity of the situation where these people jump over this cliff to avoid being captured. And men, women, and children.
French planters established crops that provided indigo, tobacco, coffee, cocoa, and sugar, and imported thousands of enslaved Africans to tend to the fields, which began to spread into the virgin forests of the interior and even cultivated on steep hillsides. They would set their capital at Fort Royal, a natural port on the southwest of the island, since renamed St. George's. Grenada began to flourish with the introduction of the crops, especially sugar. Its prosperity, however, was to make it a prize of war, and Britain recaptured the island during the 7 Years' War. As its plantation economy continued to grow, by the late 1760s it accounted for 50% of the British Caribbean cocoa exports. So did the struggle between the French and the British for control. Over the next 2 decades, the French got the best of them twice, including at the Battle of Grenada on July 6, 1779, when after a French fleet occupied the island, Lord Byron's grandfather joined Byron, led a disastrous attempt to try to get it back. Despite the losses, the British were very interested in regaining the rich plantation island, especially because by that point it was also producing cotton, an integral ingredient in their economic boom. So in 1783, they forced the French to cede them the island under the Treaty of Paris. Animosity between the new British colonists and the remaining French settlers persisted after the treaty. In 1795, a group of French Catholics, encouraged by the French and Haitian revolutions and supported by comrades in Martinique, armed themselves for rebellion. Led by Julien Fedon, an African from Grenada Central Mountains, they attacked the British at Granville, capturing and executing the British governor and other hostages. Fedon's guerrillas controlled much of the island for more than a year, but their dreams of a Black Republic would never come to pass, as they were unable to take...
Okay, the thing about Julien Fedon is that he was of mixed heritage, of what they call mulattoes back then, you know, a white plantation owner and a slave, you know what I mean? And we hear all kinds of stories about Fedon. The thing about it is there's tours of the places where he hid and carried out his excursions into getting back at the ruling colonizers at the time. You know what I mean? And one of the tricks they said he used to use is he would put the horseshoe backwards so that it would look like he's going in the opposite direction to where he was going. You know, there's a lot of nice little stories about Julien Fedon back on the island.
St. George's, and would eventually be overcome by the British Navy under the leadership of Ralph Abercrombie. Fedon was never captured. It's likely he escaped to Martinique or drowned attempting to get there, though it's sometimes said that he lived out his days hiding in Grenada's mountainous jungles. The island's enslaved would have to wait another 38 years for their emancipation, as it was in 1833 when the British Parliament passed the Slavery Abolition Act. That same year, Grenada became part of the British Windward Islands Administration. This was an administrative grouping that included most of the neighboring islands, including Tobago, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, the Grenadines, Dominica, and of course Barbados, which was the seat of government until 1885, after which it was moved to St. George's. The arrangement set up a system where the islands had a governor in common, but each island retained its own institutions. In 1859, a common court of appeal was set up, which consisted of the chief justices of each of the islands. During this period, in 1843, nutmeg was introduced to Grenada. It was a long time coming. Nutmeg is originally from the Banda Islands in Indonesia, and Europeans had tried to get their hands on it for centuries. First the Portuguese and later the Dutch took control of the spice trade, the latter by literally fighting a war and enslaving the population of the Banda Islands. During the Napoleonic Wars, however, the British occupied the islands temporarily and took the opportunity to transplant some of the nutmeg trees to other British colonies. That is how nutmeg ended up in Grenada since, one, it just happened to have perfect soil to grow the trees, and two, it was so much closer to Britain. Since then, it has been an important part of the Grenadian economy, so much so that today the harvesting of the crop provides income to 30% of the population, and the island is responsible for 20 to 30% of the world's total nutmeg production. That, along with the production of cocoa, explain Grenada's nickname, Spice Island. As time went on, Grenada's colonial status changed at a glacial pace. First, in 1877, the island became a crown colony. This meant that the old representative system where the planters held sway was discontinued and changed to one where the governor was much more powerful. This was not so much because the planters had been abusing their power, but rather that they showed little interest in public affairs and were mostly absent.
Absentee owners.
In 1922, as a result of the recommendations of the Wood Commission, the island was granted 5 elected members in the Legislative Council. This was largely the work of a single man, T.A. Maryshow.
T.A. Maryshow.
Maryshow was a prominent journalist who was a longtime advocate of representative government in a West Indian federation. He would become...
This guy is still very, very prominent on the island when people talk about the Grenada. There's actually a T.A. Maryshow Technical College that's been there forever. You know what I mean? So yeah, we learn a lot about T.A. Maryshow on the island, like a lot.
The most notable Grenadian politician of the early 20th century. Even these early minor concessions, however, were restricted by race. Voting was limited to those with minimum property ownership, which resulted in the exclusion of the majority black peasantry. The UK considered making constitutional changes in the 1940s, but they came to naught. Instead, it would take until 1951 for universal suffrage to come to the island. This time, the reason was social upheaval as a result of the so-called Red Sky Days, so named for the way that...
See, he said red sky, but we on the island call it sky red. That's when the labor movement decided we ain't having it no more, and they just set the city of St. George ablaze and things like that. My mom used to tell me stories about that.
The plantations and buildings set aflame by workers had painted the sky. This was during a month-long general strike, the first in Grenada's history, and one where the British had to use military reinforcements to regain control of the situation. Yep. The man responsible for the labor mobilization was Eric Gary, the force behind trade unionism in the island since 1949, when he returned to Grenada after being deported from...
I'll tell you, this guy here, I actually met him several times because my mom was a supporter of his. So I was lucky enough to meet this guy several times, watched him play cricket, went to his political rallies and stuff when I was a kid. I remember him driving by and stopping by the rum shop and hitting a shot of rum with the people and thing, you know, with the guys in the rum shop. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. I'm sitting here reacting to Grenadian history and boom. That's wild, isn't it? Yeah, but I remember my dad was also a supporter of this guy here too, E.M. Gary. Wow.
Aruba for his attempts at organizing the workers there. He had founded the Grenada Manual and Mental Workers Union in 1950 and had had some success in gaining compensation for workers, but the strike widely surpassed those previous accomplishments. Wages were increased sometimes as much as 33.3%, and provision was made for paid leave. Moreover, beyond the...
Here's one of the things that people used to say, older people used to say back on the island. They said because of Gary, poor people went from nylon panties to cotton panties. Poor women, that is. Went from nylon to cotton panties. That was a big old saying there, you know what I mean? And later on, you're going to see where the split comes with the generation gap there, you know, in my mom's generation and then the younger generation. You'll see that coming up.
Universal suffrage, there was also an expansion in the number of elected members in the Legislative Council. Not surprisingly then, Gary used his newfound fame and popularity to found a new political organization, the Grenada United Labour Party, which would go on to win every election for the next decade and propel Gary as the main politician
25 years.
Decades. Not that there wasn't competition. There was Herbert Blaise, who founded the Grenada National Party, or GNP.
There's another guy that I didn't meet him, but I remember after the invasion, him being made prime minister again, so we kind of went back to where we were. And at the time, he wasn't a very sprightly guy, you know what I mean? And breakdancing was big then, so he was driving from the airport going down through the village. So that's when we put on our breakdancing music, because that's what we used to call him, breakdance, because he was kind of a jokey when he walked, you know. Put on breakdancing music and stop the motorcade and start doing all little breakdances and stuff, mimicking him, because he wasn't a very popular figure, you understand what I say?
Managed to dislodge Gary from his chief minister position in 1961. This success had a lot to do with the party's support of a political union with Trinidad. As it happens, from 1958 to 1962, Grenada, along with most of the other British colonies of the Caribbean, including Jamaica, considered creating some type of unified federal state. Squabbles over what exactly this would look like, and concern from Jamaicans about subsidizing smaller islands, however, led to Jamaica's exit from the venture. This left the potential to center the project around Trinidad, but Eric Williams, the Trinidadian leader, decided to say no to a federation without Jamaica, with his famous phrase, 1 from 10 leaves naught.
So I remember about this here too, because that kind of drew a slight rift between the Caribbean islands there when on Jamaica, because you know they put it to us like, you know, Jamaica didn't think they were too good for us. Jamaica and Trinidad. I remember Eric Williams too. Eric Williams has got a really good book on capitalism and slavery. That's a good read. too, you know what I mean? So check that book out. That, I believe that's what it's called, Capitalism and Slavery. And I remember him being Prime Minister of Trinidad too, you know what I mean? He was there for a long time too, man. Just like E.M. Gary was there for a long time in Grenada.
This setback, coupled with the GMP's inability to deal with the working class demands, paved the way for Eric Gary's return. Gary would go on to be the leader of the island until 1979, first under a new relationship with Britain as a free associated state between 1967 and 1974, and later as an independent Grenada's first prime minister. The other opposition that developed during this time was the New Jewel Movement, or NJM. This was a group that advocated what it called participatory democracy and was rooted in the Black Power movement that had shook the Caribbean in the early 70s. It was led by Maurice Bishop, a lawyer
There he
educated
is.
in Britain, and other similarly educated intellectuals who saw Garyism as the exact wrong path for the island. Independence for Grenada.
Hold on, let's go back a little bit here.
Educated in Britain, and other similarly educated intellectuals who saw Garyism as the exact wrong path for
Okay.
the island. Independence for Grenada officially came
Come on now, I'm
February
trying to show
7,
these people something
1974.
here. All
It,
right,
however, was
let's
not
go
the
back.
Independence
Okay.
for Grenada
Oh, my hand.
educated intellectuals who saw Garyism as
Okay, that guy sitting there, two from the left. The second guy from the left, that's Hudson Austin, I do believe his last name was Austin, and he was in charge of the military then. And I remember when the coup d'etat happened, that where he died, Maurice Bishop died. The favorite phrase he had was like, "We will put a curfew." Instead of saying curfew, he said curfew. And I remember that being the big joke and thing. Oh my God, this is bringing back some serious memories, bruh. They just let them out of jail like about 10 years ago. So I remember these rallies too. I went to a couple of them.
as the exact wrong path for the island. Independence for Grenada officially came on February 7, 1974. It, however, was not the panacea or even joyful occasion you might think. Instead, the transition was marked by violence, strikes, and controversy centering around Gary. This was especially so because of sharp economic decline and the massive inequality that persisted in the island. Unemployment in 1970, for example, stood around 75%. Strikes and controversy centering around Gary.
Hold
This
on.
was especially so
Are you
because
gonna
of
have to
sharp
bear with me
economic
going through here?
and joyful occasion you might think. Instead,
See, I remember this day too. No, I don't know if there was Bloody Monday or Bloody Sunday, but this area here, I live back behind there. I was in a
transition
window
was marked by
up on the
violence,
hill there,
strikes, and
looking down at all of
controversy
this
centering around
happening.
Gary. This was especially so because of sharp economic decline and the massive inequality that persisted in the island. Unemployment in 1970, for example, stood around 75%. Gary's extravagance didn't help, nor did the corruption scandal popularly referred to as Quandermania, which emptied the nation's coffers. Furthermore, his crackdown on the Black Power movement that was sweeping the Caribbean had undermined his credentials as a leader.
Okay, now he's talking about the crackdown of the Black Power movement. I remember they had what they call the secret police, you know what I mean? And they would like investigate young people and things like that. And my dad was a policeman there. And how they had the policeman then, he lived in the barracks and then he come home. Rarely ever seen the man. I ain't even gonna lie to you. But we always know when he's coming home. Because my oldest brother used to hang out on the blocks with all the young fellas with the Afro, Black Power, and all that stuff. And whenever we know how we would know Daddy was coming home was my brother would be climbing through the window because he'd see Daddy coming and he'd take off, because if Daddy see young men hanging out by the side of the street, he already could beat them up because, you know, you're all of the troublemakers, the communists, and all of that stuff, you know what I mean? And but back then, older guys used to do the weirdest thing. They used to have what you call pegs, and they put on the back of the heels of their shoes. So whenever they walk in at night, you could hear them coming, co, 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 co. So whenever the fellas on the block hear that, they'd start running because my dad being a policeman, had a number, 94 Charles is coming, so everybody's running because my dad would want to beat everybody up. You know what I mean? He was just like that, you know, and he was supposedly part of the secret police too, you know what I mean? And I guess I was too young to realize or to see a lot of it. Of course, I'm living in a household where they were supporting Gary at the time, you know, but I didn't hear all about the oppression and all of that stuff. Now, I saw on the news all the stuff is going on, but then, you know, the government was controlling the news pretty much, so we hear what they want us to hear, you know what I mean? But we would hear stories and stuff about, there was one story which was rare for us on the island. There was a guy named Blunt. That's what they called him. He was a Rastafarian, and they found him shot to death with a bullet hole in his head, and they said there was political reasons for that, but nobody ever knew what happened. I don't know if they ever solved who killed him or anything like that. Let's keep going.
Leader who defended the black masses, as did his acceptance of a knighthood from the Queen. The more concerning issue, however, was Gary's heavy-handed tactics against his opposition, which made some people worry that Gary might install himself as a dictator.
There was two rival fractions. The ones for the opposition party was called the Rats, and the one for the Gary were called the Mongoose. So they call them the Mongoose Gang. And any little political rally, boy, they'd go in there and disrupt with sticks and sometimes machetes and beating people and stuff like that. They carried on. I remember those days too. I remember them saying that Gary was going to be a dictator.
1970, he formed a private army called the Mongoose Gang, which he used to beat his opponents. One of the more notorious incidents, known as Bloody Sunday, occurred on November 18, 1973, when the gang badly beat Maurice Bishop and two other members of the MJM.
Remember that?
Bishop suffered a broken jaw in the attack and was hospitalized for several weeks. In response, a committee of 22 was established by the trade unions, civic organizations, and the church, which then organized a strike.
That's where I went to church.
1974, and a protest march on January 21st. The latter one turned especially violent as the marchers were attacked by police.
Yep.
Known as Bloody Monday, several people.
Oh Lord, I remember that day. I remember it because my mom kept me away from school that day. And earlier on, I showed you that I was looking down on it. Well, I didn't just look down on it. I actually went down there just to see what was going on. And I'm telling you, man, I remember the crowd getting real antsy. And all of a sudden, these men, a lot of them with shirts off, you know what I mean, sweating and glistening, machetes, sticks, and they just bust through the crowd and they just start whipping people. And there was a lot of school kids there too, you know, in uniforms and stuff like that, you know. And you know, their eyes were just red from the sun, or if they were drinking rum before they decided to do that violence, because, you know, red eyes, I know, because my dad used to drink a lot of rum and he always had red eyes. I always used to think, you know, man, they look like the devil. But they come through there, boy, and, you know, luckily I only live like one street up, so I started running home, and they were chasing and just swinging, whack, whack, you know. And I remember I got to the house, and several people came to the door trying to get in, and I let in a few people. Some of them had blood and stuff on them. And of course, a lot of the school children had white blouses and shirts, so they had blood on them too. And the guys with the sticks came up and were banging on the door. But, you know, I didn't open it, and they didn't break in. They left after a while, and I was at the window just watching them, and they were just like attacking every and anything, you know what I mean? And there were policemen there, but they weren't really doing anything. They were just there. They didn't have any guns or nothing. Back then, they just had nightsticks. I don't know if they participated in doing it, or if it was just the gang that was sent to do it. But that was a hell of a day, boy. You know what I mean? And that was the first time the world started to look gray to me, because before it was kind of colorful. You know, ooh, you know, I'm in the tropics and thing. You know, but things kind of turned kind of grayish for me. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
People were injured, and Rupert Bishop, the father of Maurice Bishop,
Bam.
the leader of the New Jew movement, was killed.
Yep. Heard that
Independence
gunshot
Day
too.
itself, February 7th, 1974, the NJM's entire leadership was imprisoned. Gary still won the next election in 1976, but the NJM, along with other opposition parties, managed to reduce Gulp's majority.
I remember that election too, because I remember they were saying that there were ballot boxes floating in the river and all kind of corruption with the election and stuff like that. So I remember that too.
In 1970,
What's with the coach?
She does that every time we get a great review. People love our reliable, award-winning internet.
They also love our mobile coverage.
What if we combined internet and mobile for one low price? Introducing Optimum.
In 1977, as Gary began receiving advice from General Augusto Pinochet of Chile on how to deal with civil unrest, and his police and military also received.
See, that was what really scared people, man. He was getting advice from Pinochet, of all people. Pinochet. That dude was a nut. I'm sorry, but he was a nut. And Gary was getting advice from him. Dude was known to do some torturous things to his own people.
Counterinsurgency training from that regime, the
Yep.
NJM retaliated by developing links with Fidel Castro and his Marxist government in Cuba. Something had to give. And it did. On March 1979, while Gary was out of the country, the NJM staged a bloodless coup, proclaimed.
Now, I remember that day specifically. I remember I was at home. My mom wasn't at home at the time, and it was early in the morning. But then she rushed in and she said, "The communists are taking over. The communists are taking over." And I was like, "What are you talking about? What communists? You know, who are taking over?" And there was rumblings about something that's going to happen, but you know, I wasn't privy to it. I was pretty young. I was 79. It's about 15, 16. You know what I mean? And I remember hearing sporadic gunshots turn on the radio, and I remember the people on the radio talking about they were playing Bob Marley songs, of course. You know, well, not yet. It was somebody saying and screaming. It wasn't very intelligible. Now, where I live, the radio station at the time was right over the hill, and after all that ruckus, I saw smoke come out of the radio station, and then younger people come on, and then Bob Marley music start playing. Get up, stand up for your rights, you know what I mean, and all that stuff. And that's another day again, man. Things got a little dimmer because guns wasn't a big deal. You know, the police had guns, but they left it at the barracks. They didn't walk around with it. We didn't have a military per se. There was no army, so we didn't see anybody walking around with guns or nothing like that. And then all of a sudden there's AK-47s and all kinds of stuff, you know what I mean? And that day was a really strange day. It was like living in another different universe or something. It was pretty strange.
Named the People's Revolutionary Government, or PRG, and named their leader, Maurice Bishop, as prime minister. The new government.
He said a bloodless coup. One person died, I believe it's that day or the day after, and his name was Brezan, Inspector Brezan. I went to school with his kid, and he died that day.
And faced opposition from Western nations because of its socialist principles and the substantial aid it had begun receiving from Cuba.
There has been a major campaign
God, I remember him.
over the last several weeks and months, with some remarks by the Vice President in Miami, and then the President himself. And in all of these remarks and allegations, different allegations were made against our country.
But it embarked in a program to rebuild the economy.
That dude was a dynamic speaker. It all seemed like it was just yesterday too. I used to see him walking on the beach back home. I remember we had a carnival and he was out in the middle of the people dancing and singing and thing.
Economy, which had been left in disarray by Gary. Widely popular, although justly criticized for its suppression of political dissent, the revolution ended in October 1983 after a split developed in the leadership of the party. The majority of it voted for joint leadership by Prime Minister Maurice Bishop and Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Bernard Coard. But when Bishop refused to abide by the decision, he was placed under house arrest on October 13, 1983.
Again, I remember the confusion of that. There's a code, dude. There were so many people that we all went to school with that was in that. Most of them just got let out of jail because they call them the Grenada 17 or 18 or something like that. And a lot of them, while they were in jail, they got their degrees, lawyers, and all kinds of stuff like that.
Six days later, on the 19th, he was freed by a crowd of civilian supporters.
I remember
Bishop
that too.
then led them to Fort Rupert, the military headquarters,
Big
where he
mistake.
had access to the armory. Two army personnel were then shot by...
I remember that big wall there you see there, people were jumping off of there. There used to be all kind of vines on there, people getting stuck in the vine. Luckily, they didn't hit the ground. Because the army came from the front. And they had an armored car, and they just came up from the front, man. And it's like People's Revolutionary Army, PRA, they used to call them. They said the thing about that place there too. That's a place where there was a little playground back there. When we were kids, my mom used to take us up there, and the police band used to have like concerts back there. And then all of a sudden, there's violence in the place and thing. Years later, but still, you know. Luckily for me, I have the memories of going back there and having fun because this place overlooked the natural harbor. It's a beautiful view. If you ever go to Grenada, go back there. It's a beautiful view. And up there housed the police station. That's where the main police station in the city is housed. Yeah.
by a known assailant, and a struggle followed for control of the fort. Bishop and 7 of his closest comrades were disarmed and then shot dead by members of the People's Revolutionary Army. Others were killed or wounded in the crossfire or as they attempted to escape the fort. A revolutionary military council took over and placed the island under curfew. In response, less than a week later,
that's when that Austin guy says, "I'm putting the country on a curfew." And his order was to shoot anybody on sight if you see them out. And that the 4 days, man, those 4 days, the 19th to the 25th, was the quietest days I've ever had. And they were taken off guard too. Luckily in my backyard and thing, you know, I had chickens and food growing and all of that, because I probably would have starved. Because it happened like that, boom, you know. All of a sudden, don't come out or you get shot, you know, and you'd see the police jeeps going by. Of course, the police, not the police, but the army jeeps going by. Of course, I still went out the street and thing, and, you know, because most of the guys driving by were people I knew. Did I feel unsafe? I don't know. I don't think I did. I don't remember feeling unsafe then. I did feel unsafe when the invasion happened, though, because a lot of things were happening that I've never seen before, like F-16 fighter jets. You know what I mean? And those things could miss and drop the bomb, because I live right next to the airport that they say the revolutionary government was building to have MiGs land and you know, attack America from there and stuff like that.
October 25th, the United States, supported by right-wing governments in the Caribbean, launched Operation Urgent Fury. Despite widespread international condemnation and a UN vote that called it a quote-unquote flagrant violation of international law, it took the US 4 days to overwhelm the defenders and install an interim government, which ended any potential chance of a regrouping of surviving popular revolutionary forces. In 2000, a Grenada Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established to deal with some of the controversies of the 1970s and 1980s. It attempted to find Bishop's body, but it failed. Its report was completed in 2006. Those convicted of plotting to kill Maurice Bishop and his comrades came to be known as the Grenada 17. The last of them was released from prison in 2009. Since then, politics has been dominated by two major parties. They are the New National Party and the National Democratic Congress. The former is a conservative party, the result of a union between Blaze's National Party and other right-wing parties after the US invasion. And the latter is a center-left party, which was founded in opposition to the NNP by George Brizan, an erstwhile member of the NJM.
I remember this dude here too. Wow. I haven't thought about these people in years. George Brizan.
Between the two of them, they account for all prime ministers since the US invasion, 4 for the NNP and 3 for the NDC, with the NNP currently in power under the leadership of Keith Mitchell.
Actually, that has changed. There's a younger, more liberal prime minister there right now, and I can't remember his name offhand, but he just got voted in last year. And he beat this guy for the seat. Last year, the year before, I remember my brother being really excited about it because he said he's for the people and all of that. Because this guy was letting in a bunch of foreign investors come in there, and we were starting to have trouble with them wanting to take land and tell us we can't go on the land and stuff like that. So that's when the new guy come up, you know what I mean? A younger guy too. But when I left the island, George Brizan was just about forming his party. I think Herbert Blaze was still the prime minister, because what they failed to say is that after America invaded, the interim government was headed by Herbert Blaze.
Meanwhile, the economy has shifted from agriculture to services, especially tourism. Today, it accounts for 55.8% of overall GDP, while agriculture accounts for less than 5% of GDP. Although GDP per capita has steadily improved since the US invasion, inequality remains a problem. The main issue is that its dependence on tourism leaves it very vulnerable to global currents. COVID has been devastating for the island, but a far more immediate concern for the future are hurricanes. The last two major ones, Ivan and Emily in 2004 and 2005 respectively, were devastating for the island. Especially Ivan, which reached Category 5 status and damaged at least 89% of the small island.
Yeah, my brother's roof got blown off by Ivan. Wow, and that's my little area there too. And the thing about it, the hurricanes is a concern because we are outside the hurricane belt, so we never really get hurricane. When I left the island, the last hurricane we got was Hurricane Janet. That was in 1955. I lived like 21 years on the island, never experienced a hurricane. The storms, residuals from hurricanes that bypass other islands. As a matter of fact, when I was a kid, people would leave their island to come to Grenada to escape hurricane winds and stuff like that. But now, we haven't had one since 2005 though. So
28 of 31,000 homes, as well as its two major hospitals. As hurricanes multiply because of climate change, Grenada will have to invest in resilient infrastructure in a sustainable economic model. Today, it seems like Grenada has put political violence behind it. Dependency, on the other hand, is a much harder problem to tackle.
Calypso in the background. All right, man. That relatively accurate. Left out certain things there. I tried to fill in little bits in here, especially when my experience allowed me to. The experience there. I haven't been back there since 1986, but I keep abreast with the things that's going on in there, and they're doing pretty good. They're starting to diversify the economy from tourism because, as far as I know, we weren't that massive of a tourist island, you know what I mean, when I was there. But I ain't gonna lie to you, and I'm gonna tell you, if you get a chance to visit. It's really peaceful. People are really friendly. check it out if you can, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed telling you, you know, watching it with you guys. And there goes the political history of Grenada. And like he said, they said, oh, it had a really violent past. But if you notice, it's in intervals. It's not like it's a constant, you know, situation. And it was a bloodless coup. You know what I mean? So pretty much a bloodless coup. So revolution. So there was scrimmages and all kinds of things like that going on, you know, but not mass death like what was happening with Pinochet and them in South America. Nothing like that. But thank you guys for watching this with me. I hope you guys are taking care of each other. Cool runnings.